I caught my daughter-in-law Sophie tossing my late granddaughter Lily's baby blanket into the trash. For a moment I couldn't move. The sight of that faded pink fabric, the one I'd wrapped Lily in the day she came home from the hospital, crumpled in Sophie's hand as if it were nothing more than a rag, sent a jolt through my chest. My heart hammered in my ears. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, but all I could do was watch as Sophie, her face set and cold, marched out the back door and dropped the blanket into the garbage bin. I didn't think. I just acted. My slippers slapped against the kitchen tile as I hurried after her, the screen door banging behind me. The air outside was sharp, the kind that stings your lungs and makes your eyes water, but I barely noticed. I reached the bin just as Sophie turned to go back inside, her eyes meeting mine for a split second. There was something in her gaze, defiance maybe, or guilt, but she said nothing. She just disappeared into the house, leaving me alone with the trash. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. The smell of coffee grounds and old fruit peels hit me, but I didn't care. I reached in, pushing aside a crumpled cereal box and a sticky apple core until my fingers closed around the blanket. I pulled it out, clutching it to my chest, breathing in the faint scent of baby powder and sunshine that still lingered in the fabric. For a moment I just stood there, holding it, my mind spinning with questions. Why would Sophie throw this away? Didn't she know what it meant to me? To all of us? Back inside, I spread the blanket out on my bed, smoothing the worn cotton with shaking hands. The edges were frayed, the little embroidered lamb in the corner faded from too many washes. I traced the stitches with my finger, remembering the nights I'd rocked Lily to sleep, her tiny fist curled around the edge of this very blanket. The ache in my chest was almost unbearable, but then, as I ran my hand over the fabric, I felt something strange. A hard lump, small but unmistakable, hidden between the layers. My breath caught. I pressed the spot, feeling the outline of something that didn't belong. My mind raced. Had Lily hidden something here? Or no, it couldn't be. I turned the blanket over, searching for a seam, a loose thread, anything that might explain the lump. Curiosity and dread tangled inside me. I went to my sewing box and found a pair of small, sharp scissors. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold them steady. I snipped at the stitches, careful not to damage the fabric, pulling the thread free one by one. The opening widened, and I reached inside, my fingers brushing against something cool and metallic. I pulled it out, a tiny tarnished key, no bigger than the tip of my finger. My heart pounded. Why would there be a key sewn into Lily's baby blanket? I turned it over in my palm, searching for a clue, but there was nothing. Just a simple, old-fashioned key, the kind you might see in a jewelry box or a diary. But that wasn't all. As I shook the blanket, a folded piece of paper slipped out, yellowed and soft from years of hiding. I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the shaky handwriting. It was Lily's, my sweet Lily, gone too soon, her words reaching out to me from beyond the grave. I read the first line, and my knees nearly buckled. The words were simple, but they carried a weight I could barely comprehend. My mind reeled. What was this key for? Why had Lily hidden it? And why had Sophie tried to throw it all away? I stared at the blanket, the key, the letter, my heart pounding with fear and hope and 1,000 questions. I had no idea what I was about to uncover, but I knew one thing for certain. Nothing in my life would ever be the same again. How had it come to this? How had our family, once so close, become a place of secrets and suspicion? As I clutched the blanket to my chest, I realized I needed to understand how we'd gotten here, before I could face whatever truth Lily had left behind. Before the blanket, before the secrets and the silence, there was laughter in my house. There was the sound of little feet running down the hallway, the smell of cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings, and the warmth of a family that, for a time, felt unbreakable. I remember those days with a bittersweet ache, as if they belonged to someone else, a woman who hadn't yet learned how fragile happiness could be. My son David was the center of my world. From the moment he was born, he was my pride and my joy, the boy who grew into a man with a gentle heart and a quiet strength. He was the kind of son who called every Sunday, who never forgot my birthday, who hugged me just a little longer than most grown men would. When he met Sophie, I saw the way his eyes lit up, the way he smiled at her as if she were the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. I wanted to be happy for him, and I tried. I really did. Sophie was beautiful, in a sharp, striking way. She had a laugh that could fill a room, and a confidence that sometimes bordered on arrogance. She was clever, ambitious, and always seemed to know exactly what she wanted. At first, I thought she was good for David. She challenged him, pushed him to be bolder, to take risks. But there was something about her that made me uneasy, a restlessness in her eyes, a way she had of looking at people as if she were always measuring them, weighing their worth. Still, I welcomed her into our family. I told myself that every mother feels a little threatened when her son falls in love, that it was just my own insecurities whispering doubts in my ear. When they announced they were expecting, I put all of that aside. The day Lily was born, I held her in my arms and felt a love so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. She was perfect, tiny, pink, with a shock of dark hair and David's dimpled chin. From the very beginning, she was my sunshine, the light that filled every corner of my heart. Those early years were golden. David and Sophie moved into a little house just a few blocks away, and I became the kind of grandmother I'd always dreamed of being. I baked cookies with Lily, took her to the park, read her stories until she fell asleep in my lap. David would stop by after work, sometimes just to sit and talk, sometimes to ask for advice about fatherhood or marriage. Even Sophie in those days seemed softer, more open. She would bring over casseroles, ask for my help with Lily's first steps, laugh with me over the chaos of toddlerhood. But as Lily grew, something shifted. David started working longer hours, and Sophie seemed to grow distant, distracted. She stopped coming by as often, and when she did, she was always in a hurry, her phone never far from her hand. I tried to reach out, to bridge the gap, but she brushed me off with polite smiles and vague promises. I told myself it was just the stress of young motherhood, that things would get better with time. Then came the day that changed everything. Lily was 5, full of life and mischief, her laughter echoing through the house as she played hide-and-seek with her father. I remember the way she hugged me that morning. Her arms tight around my neck, her voice whispering, "I love you, Grandma." I never imagined it would be the last time I'd hear her say those words. The accident was sudden, senseless. A car, a moment's distraction, and just like that, Lily was gone. The world tilted on its axis, and nothing made sense anymore. David was shattered, a shell of the man he'd been. He stopped coming by, stopped calling, lost in his own grief. Sophie withdrew even further, her eyes hollow, her words clipped and cold. The house that had once been filled with laughter became a place of silence and shadows. I tried to hold us together. I cooked meals no one ate, sent messages that went unanswered, offered comfort that was rejected. My own grief was a heavy, suffocating thing, but I pushed it aside, telling myself I had to be strong for David, for Sophie, for the memory of the little girl we'd all loved so much. But the harder I tried, the more they pulled away. Sophie, especially, seemed to resent my presence. She stopped inviting me over, made excuses when I offered to help. There were moments when I caught her looking at me with something like contempt, as if my grief was an inconvenience, a reminder of a life she wanted to forget. I tried to understand, to forgive, but the distance between us grew wider with every passing day. Still, I clung to the memories of those golden years, the birthday parties, the bedtime stories, the way Lily's eyes would light up when she saw me. I kept her blanket, her favorite books, the little shoes she'd outgrown, tucked away in a box in my closet. They were all I had left of her, and I guarded them fiercely. But there was something about Sophie that always made me uneasy. Even in those early days, when everything seemed perfect, there was a coldness beneath her charm, a secret she kept hidden behind her smile. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the good, but now, standing in my bedroom with Lily's blanket and the mysterious key, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd been blind to the truth all along. As I stared at the letter in my hand, my mind drifted back to the day everything changed. The day I realized that the family I'd loved so fiercely was slipping through my fingers, and that nothing would ever be the same again. In the weeks leading up to that morning, I'd noticed Sophie behaving strangely. She'd started coming by the house more often, but never for long. She'd move quickly from room to room, her eyes darting to the shelves and closets where I kept Lily's things. Sometimes I'd find her standing in Lily's old bedroom, staring at the boxes I'd packed away, her face unreadable. When I asked if she was looking for something, she'd just smile tightly and say she was tidying up, or that she wanted to help me move on. But her words always felt hollow, rehearsed, as if she were reciting lines from a play she didn't believe in. One afternoon, I heard the front door creak open and the soft thud of footsteps in the hallway. I was in the kitchen, hands deep in a bowl of bread dough, but something about the silence made me uneasy. I wiped my hands on a towel and stepped into the hall, just in time to see Sophie slipping into Lily's room. She didn't notice me watching as she knelt by the closet, rummaging through the boxes. My heart pounded. I wanted to ask what she was doing, but I held back, afraid of what I might hear. A few minutes later, she emerged, clutching something to her chest. It was Lily's baby blanket, the one with the faded lamb in the corner, the one I'd kept safe all these years. Sophie's face was set, her jaw tight. She didn't look at me as she hurried past, heading straight for the back door. I followed, my footsteps silent on the carpet, my breath caught in my throat. I watched from the doorway as she lifted the lid of the garbage bin and tossed the blanket inside, as if it were nothing more than a piece of trash. My heart twisted. I waited until she was gone, then rushed outside, my hands shaking as I dug through the bin. I pulled the blanket free, brushing off coffee grounds and bits of eggshell, and cradled it in my arms. The fabric was still soft, still carried the faintest trace of Lily's scent. Back inside, I spread the blanket on my bed, smoothing the wrinkles with trembling hands. That's when I felt it, a small, hard lump sewn into the lining. My breath caught. I ran my fingers over the spot, searching for a seam. There, near the edge, the stitches were newer, tighter than the rest. My heart pounded as I fetched my sewing scissors and carefully snipped the threads, one by one. Inside, I found a tiny sealed envelope, yellowed with age. My name was written on the front in Lily's careful, looping handwriting. I stared at it, my vision blurring with tears. How could this be? Lily had been so young, so full of life. Why would she leave me a letter, hidden away in her baby blanket? With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. The words were shaky, as if written in a hurry, but there was no mistaking Lily's voice. "Dear Grandma," it began, "I'm scared. I don't know who else to tell. Mommy says I shouldn't talk about it, but I have to. I have to tell someone I trust." My breath caught in my throat. I read on, my eyes devouring every word. Lily wrote about strange things she'd seen, about secrets and whispers, about feeling afraid in her own home. She mentioned a key, said it was important, that it would help me understand. "If you find this, please don't be mad at Mommy. I just want you to know the truth." Tears streamed down my face as I finished the letter. I reached into the blanket again and found the key, a small, tarnished thing, cool and heavy in my palm. I turned it over, searching for a clue, but there was nothing to tell me what it opened or why Lily had hidden it. I sat on the edge of the bed, the letter in one hand, the key in the other, my mind racing. What had Lily been trying to tell me? What secret had she carried, alone and afraid, in the last days of her life? And why had Sophie tried so hard to make sure I never found out? The questions swirled in my mind, each one heavier than the last. I felt a cold dread settle in my chest, but also a spark of determination. I owed it to Lily to find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As I stared at the letter, my hands trembling, I knew I couldn't rest until I uncovered the secret my granddaughter had tried so desperately to share. What was this key for? What had Lily seen? And what was Sophie so desperate to hide? The letter haunted me. I read it over and over, searching for meaning in every shaky word, every childish phrase. "I'm scared. I don't know who else to tell." What could have frightened Lily so much? What had she seen or heard that made her hide a letter and a key in her baby blanket? I tried to remember if she'd ever said anything to me, any hint of fear or confusion, but all I could recall were her bright eyes and her laughter, the way she'd run into my arms and beg for one more story before bed. But now, every memory felt different, colored by the knowledge that Lily had been afraid. I thought back to the last few months before the accident. There had been changes, small at first, Lily clinging to me a little longer when I dropped her off at home, her eyes darting to Sophie when she thought no one was looking. She'd started having nightmares, waking up crying for her father, for me. I'd asked Sophie about it, but she'd brushed it off, said Lily was just sensitive, that she'd grow out of it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I started looking for answers, retracing my steps through those final days. I went through Lily's things, searching for anything out of place. In her old room, the sunlight slanting through the curtains, I opened drawers and boxes, running my fingers over her toys and books, desperate for a clue. I found a notebook tucked behind her favorite stuffed bear. The pages filled with drawings, some happy, some dark and frantic, with scribbles of a woman's face, always frowning, always watching. The key weighed heavy in my pocket. I tried it in every lock I could find, jewelry boxes, old diaries, even the shed out back, but nothing fit. I asked David if he remembered Lily having a special box or a diary, but he just shook his head, his eyes distant. He was still lost in his own grief, barely present, and I didn't have the heart to push him. Sophie, on the other hand, grew more agitated every time I mentioned Lily. She snapped at me for living in the past, told me I needed to let go and move on. But I couldn't. Not when I felt Lily's presence so strongly, urging me to keep searching. The tension between Sophie and me grew with each passing day. She started coming by less often, and when she did, she was cold and distant. I caught her going through my things more than once, her eyes darting around the room as if she were looking for something. When I confronted her, she denied everything, accused me of being paranoid. But I saw the fear in her eyes, the way her hands shook when she thought I wasn't looking. One night, I had a dream about Lily. She was standing at the foot of my bed, her hair tangled, her eyes wide and pleading. "Find the truth, Grandma," she whispered. I woke up with my heart racing, the key clutched in my hand. I knew I couldn't give up, no matter how much it hurt. I started asking questions, quietly at first. I called Lily's old teacher, Mrs. Harper, and asked if she'd noticed anything unusual. She hesitated, then told me Lily had seemed withdrawn in the weeks before her death, that she'd drawn pictures of a scary lady and sometimes cried when it was time to go home. I thanked her, my mind spinning. What had been happening in that house? I remembered a day, not long before the accident, when I'd come to pick Lily up for a sleepover. She'd been sitting on the front steps, her knees pulled to her chest, her face streaked with tears. Sophie stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression hard. "She's just being dramatic," she'd said, waving me off. But Lily had clung to me, whispering, "Don't leave me." Grandma. I'd promised her everything would be okay, but now I wondered if I'd failed her. The more I dug, the more I noticed Sophie's behavior changing. She started locking doors, hiding her phone, whispering on calls when she thought I couldn't hear. I overheard her arguing with David late at night, her voice sharp and angry. "Your mother is meddling again," she hissed. "She needs to let it go." David's voice was tired, defeated. "She's just grieving, Sophie. We all are." But Sophie wouldn't let it rest. She started making veiled threats, warning me to mind my own business and stop digging up the past. But I couldn't stop. I began to suspect that Lily's death wasn't the accident we'd all believed it to be. The police report had been brief, a car accident, a moment's distraction. But what if there was more? What if someone had been careless or worse, reckless? I requested a copy of the report, combed through every detail. There were inconsistencies. Witnesses who'd seen Sophie arguing with Lily in the parking lot, a neighbor who'd heard shouting the night before. My grief turned to anger, then to determination. I owed it to Lily to find the truth. Flashbacks came to me in waves, moments I'd dismissed, now heavy with new meaning. The time Lily had a bruise on her arm, and Sophie said she'd fallen off the swing. The way Lily flinched when Sophie raised her voice. The time I found Lily hiding in the closet, her eyes wide with fear. I'd asked her what was wrong, but she'd just shaken her head, whispering, "Don't tell Mommy." I started keeping a journal, writing down everything I remembered, every detail that seemed important. I talked to neighbors, friends, anyone who might have seen or heard something. Some were sympathetic, others wary, but a few shared stories that made my blood run cold. Stories of Sophie losing her temper, of Lily crying late at night, of David leaving the house after heated arguments. The box was heavier than I expected, as if it carried not just secrets, but the weight of all the years I'd spent searching for answers. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid, the hinges creaking softly in the quiet room. Inside, nestled among a few faded photographs and a tiny silver bracelet, was a small, spiral-bound diary. The cover was worn, the edges frayed, but I recognized Lily's handwriting immediately. Her name written in careful, looping letters, surrounded by little hearts and stars. I pressed the diary to my chest, a wave of longing and dread washing over me. For a moment I couldn't bring myself to open it. I was afraid of what I might find, afraid that the truth would be more than I could bear. But I owed it to Lily, to the little girl who had trusted me enough to hide her fears in these pages. I opened the diary to the first entry, dated months before the accident. The words were innocent at first. Stories about school, her favorite games, the friends she played with at recess. But as I turned the pages, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew shakier, the words more hurried. Mommy got mad again today. She yelled at me for spilling juice. I tried to say sorry, but she wouldn't listen. I wish Daddy was home more. My heart clenched. I read on, each entry painting a clearer picture of life inside that house. Mommy says I'm bad. She says I ruin everything. I don't want to be bad. I just want her to love me. Tears blurred my vision as I traced the words with my finger, feeling Lily's pain as if it were my own. There were entries about David, too. How he tried to comfort Lily. How he would sneak into her room at night to read her stories when Sophie was out. Daddy makes me feel safe. I wish he didn't have to work so much. I wish Mommy was nicer to him. The diary was filled with longing, with a child's desperate hope for love and safety. Then, near the end, the entries grew darker. Mommy was really angry today. She broke my favorite cup and said it was my fault. She told me not to tell anyone or I'd be in big trouble. My hands shook as I read the last few pages, each one more heartbreaking than the last. I'm scared, Grandma. I don't know what to do. Mommy says if I tell, no one will believe me. But I know you would. I know you love me. The final entry was dated just days before the accident. Mommy and I had a fight. She said I was making Daddy unhappy. She said everything would be better if I just listened. I tried to be good, but she got so mad. I'm scared, Grandma. I wish you were here. I closed the diary, my heart pounding in my chest. The truth was there, written in Lily's own hand, a pattern of emotional abuse and manipulation, a child's silent cry for help. I felt sick, angry, and helpless all at once. How had I not seen it? How had I let Sophie's charm and confidence blind me to the pain she was causing? 1,000 questions raced through my mind. Should I confront Sophie? Should I go to David? Risk shattering what little peace he had left? Or should I keep this secret, protect my son from a truth that might destroy him? The weight of the decision pressed down on me, heavier than the box in my lap. I thought of David, of the boy he'd been and the man he'd become. He loved Lily fiercely, but he'd always been blind to Sophie's darker side. He wanted so badly to believe in his family, to hold on to the hope that things could get better. If I told him the truth, would he believe me? Or would he turn away, unable to face the reality of what had happened under his own roof? I paced the room, the diary clutched in my hands, my mind spinning with fear and doubt. I wanted justice for Lily, but I also wanted to protect David from more pain. I was trapped between two impossible choices, each one carrying its own kind of heartbreak. But as I stood there, the memory of Lily's voice echoed in my mind, her whispered plea for help, her trust in me to do what was right. I knew I couldn't stay silent, couldn't let Sophie's secrets remain buried. I had to act, no matter the cost. Evelyn realized she was in over her head, but she couldn't turn back now. The truth was out, and it demanded to be faced. I wiped my tears, steeled my resolve, and began to plan my next move. I would be careful, I would be smart, and above all, I would not let Lily's voice go unheard. I spent the next few days moving through my house like a shadow, careful and quiet, my mind always working. Every time I looked at Lily's diary, I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. I knew I couldn't go to the police with just a child's words and my own suspicions. I needed more, something concrete, something that would force the truth into the light. But I also knew I couldn't do it alone. That's when I thought of Margaret. We'd been friends since childhood, and though life had taken us in different directions, we'd always found our way back to each other. Margaret had spent 30 years on the police force before retiring, and if anyone could help me navigate this maze, it was her. I called her one morning, my voice trembling as I explained what I'd found. She listened quietly, her tone gentle but firm. "You did the right thing, Evelyn. But you have to be careful. People like Sophie, they don't give up their secrets easily." Margaret came over that afternoon, her notepad in hand, her eyes sharp and focused. We sat at my kitchen table, the diary and the key between us. She read through Lily's entries, her jaw tightening with every page. "This is serious," she said finally. "But it's not enough. We need to find out if anyone else saw or heard anything. And we need to watch Sophie, see if she slips up." With Margaret's help, I started keeping detailed notes. I wrote down every interaction with Sophie, every strange phone call, every time she came by the house. I watched her closely, looking for cracks in her composure. It wasn't long before I noticed patterns. Sophie always seemed nervous when she was near Lily's things, always quick to change the subject if I mentioned the past. She started calling David more often, her voice sweet and soothing, but I could hear the edge beneath her words. David, for his part, seemed caught in the middle. He was distant, distracted, his grief still raw. Sophie took advantage of that, planting seeds of doubt whenever she could. "Your mother's not well," I overheard her say one evening, her voice low and urgent. "She's obsessed with the past. She's making things up, David. You have to talk to her." I could see the confusion in his eyes, the way he pulled away from me, unsure of who to believe. The guilt gnawed at me. I hated the thought of driving a wedge between us, of making David choose. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered Lily's words, her fear, her hope that I would help her. I couldn't let her down. I had to be strong, even if it meant standing alone. Margaret and I worked quietly, piecing together a timeline of events. We talked to neighbors, teachers, anyone who might have seen or heard something unusual. Some remembered Lily's bruises, her sudden silences. Others recalled arguments between Sophie and David, the tension that seemed to hang over their house like a storm cloud. Margaret took notes, asked careful questions, always circling back to the same point. Was there any evidence that Lily's death hadn't been an accident? We found small things, details that didn't add up, stories that changed depending on who was telling them. A neighbor remembered seeing Sophie leave the house in a hurry the night before the accident, her face pale and drawn. Lily's teacher mentioned a phone call from Sophie, angry and abrupt, demanding to know if Lily had said anything strange at school. Each piece was small, but together they formed a picture I couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, Sophie grew more suspicious. She started showing up unannounced, her eyes scanning the rooms as if searching for something. She questioned me about my routines, asked if I'd been talking to anyone. I played dumb, keeping my answers vague, but I could feel her watching me, waiting for me to slip. The tension in the house was unbearable. David withdrew further, spending long hours at work, barely speaking to either of us. Sophie used his absence to her advantage, whispering poison into his ear whenever she could. "Your mother's losing it," she told him. "She's going to ruin everything if you don't stop her." I saw the doubt in his eyes, the way he avoided my gaze, but I refused to back down. With Margaret's support, I grew bolder, more determined. I started recording my conversations with Sophie, saving every text and voicemail. I made copies of Lily's diary, hiding them in different places in case anything happened to the original. I even installed a small camera in the hallway, hoping to catch Sophie in a moment of carelessness. Every day felt like a battle, a test of wills between me and Sophie. She tried to intimidate me, to make me doubt myself, but I stood my ground. I reminded myself that I was doing this for Lily, for David, for the truth. I couldn't let fear win. But just as I thought I had everything under control, Sophie made a move I never expected. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, she appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with anger. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. "Now." I set down my knife, my heart pounding. I knew this was it, the moment everything would come to a head. As I followed her into the living room, I steeled myself for what was to come. I didn't know what Sophie would say or what she might do, but I was ready. I had come too far to turn back now. Sophie stood in the center of my living room, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes cold and sharp. The air between us was thick with tension, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your heart race. I could hear David's footsteps upstairs, the muffled sound of a drawer closing, and I wondered if he sensed what was about to happen. I steadied myself, reminding myself of Lily's voice, of the promise I'd made to her in the quiet of my own heart. Sophie's lips curled into a tight, bitter smile. "You've been snooping, Evelyn." "I know you have. You think you're so clever, but you're just a lonely old woman who can't let go." I felt a flash of anger, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm a mother, and a grandmother. I have every right to know what happened to Lily." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "What happened to Lily was an accident." "You know that. Everyone knows that. But you can't accept it, can you? You have to blame someone." I took a deep breath, feeling the diary heavy in my pocket. "I'm not blaming anyone, Sophie. I'm looking for the truth." Lily was scared. She wrote about it. She was afraid of you. Her eyes narrowed. "You're lying." I shook my head. "I have her words, Sophie. In her own handwriting. She was terrified, and you did nothing to help her. You made her feel small, unwanted. You hurt her." Sophie's face twisted, her voice rising. "You don't know what it was like." "You weren't there, Evelyn. You never saw how difficult she could be. She was always crying, always needing something. David was never home, and I was left to deal with it all by myself. I did my best. I felt my hands shaking, but I forced myself to stand tall. Your best wasn't good enough. You broke her spirit. You made her feel like a burden. And now you want to erase her from our lives, as if she never existed." Sophie's eyes flashed with something like fear, but she covered it quickly. "You're twisting everything. You always hated me. You wanted David to yourself. You never wanted us to be happy." I opened my mouth to respond, but at that moment, David appeared at the top of the stairs, his face pale and drawn. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice uncertain. Sophie turned to him, her tone instantly softening. "David, your mother is making accusations again. She's saying terrible things about me, about Lily. She's trying to turn you against me." David looked at me, confusion and pain etched into his features. "Mom, what is she talking about?" I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "David, I found Lily's diary. She wrote about what was happening. She was scared and she needed help. I think you need to read it." Sophie's voice was sharp, desperate. "Don't listen to her. She's trying to poison you against me. She's always been jealous of our family." David hesitated, torn between us. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the way he wanted to believe in the woman he'd married, the mother of his child. But I could also see the doubt, the fear that maybe, just maybe, I was telling the truth. I pulled the diary from my pocket and held it out to him. "Please, David, just read it." "For Lily." He took the diary, his hands trembling. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning Lily's words. With each entry, his face grew paler, his jaw tightening. When he reached the final page, he looked up at Sophie, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Is this true?" Sophie's face crumpled, her bravado slipping away. "She was difficult, David. You don't know what it was like." "I was alone. I was overwhelmed. I never meant to hurt her." David's voice was raw, broken. "You were supposed to protect her. She was our daughter." Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but I saw the anger simmering beneath the surface. "You were never there. You left me to deal with everything. You don't get to judge me." David shook his head, his voice trembling. "I trusted you. I trusted you with our child." I watched the two of them, my heart aching for the family we'd lost, for the little girl who had suffered in silence. I wanted to scream, to rage at the unfairness of it all, but I forced myself to stay calm. "This isn't about blame," I said quietly. "It's about the truth. Lily deserved better." "We all did." Sophie turned on me, her voice venomous. "You think you're so perfect, Evelyn. You think you could have done better, but you weren't there. You didn't see how hard it was." I met her gaze, refusing to back down. Maybe I couldn't have saved her, but I would have tried. I would have listened. I would have loved her, no matter what. For a moment, the room was silent, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Then Sophie let out a sob, her shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I'm so sorry. David sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. I wanted to comfort him, to hold him the way I had when he was a boy, but I knew he needed time. The truth had shattered the fragile peace we'd built, and there was no going back. Sophie wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. What happens now? I looked at her, at the woman who had caused so much pain, and I felt a strange mix of anger and pity. That's not up to me, I said softly. But you can't hide from this anymore. The truth is out. David looked up, his eyes red. We have to do what's right. For Lily, Sophie nodded, her face pale. I'll do whatever you want. I just want this to be over. I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. The confrontation was over, but the fallout was just beginning. We would have to face the consequences of the truth, whatever they might be. But the fallout from this confrontation would change everything, for better or worse. But the confrontation didn't end there. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. David sat motionless, the diary open in his lap, his eyes fixed on the words his daughter had written. Sophie hovered near the window, her arms wrapped around herself, her face a mask of misery and fear. I stood by the mantel, my hands clenched so tightly I could feel my nails digging into my palms. David finally broke the silence. Why, Sophie? Why didn't you tell me things were so bad? Sophie's voice was barely audible. I was ashamed. I thought I could handle it. I thought if I just tried harder, I don't know. I didn't want you to think I was a bad mother. David shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. You should have told me. We could have gotten help. We could have done something. Sophie's eyes flashed. You were never here. You were always working, always gone. I was alone, David. I was drowning. He looked at her, pain and anger warring in his expression. That's not an excuse. You don't take it out on a child. You don't make her feel like she's the problem. Sophie's shoulders sagged. I know I failed her. I failed you. I failed everyone. I watched them, my own grief threatening to swallow me whole. I thought of all the times I'd seen the signs, all the moments I'd doubted my instincts, all the times I'd told myself it was just stress, just the pressures of motherhood. I felt a surge of guilt, a sense of responsibility I couldn't shake. David turned to me, his eyes pleading. Mom, what do we do now? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. We tell the truth. We face what happened. We honor Lily by making sure this never happens again. Sophie let out a shaky breath. Are you going to call the police? I hesitated. I don't know. I think we need to talk to someone. Maybe a counselor, maybe a lawyer. But we can't just pretend this didn't happen. David nodded, his face set. I'll do whatever it takes. For Lily. Sophie looked at him, her eyes full of regret. I'm sorry, David. I really am. He didn't answer. He just stared at the diary, lost in thought. The hours that followed were a blur. We talked, we cried, we argued. Old wounds were reopened, old resentments aired. But through it all, there was a sense of relief. A sense that the truth, as painful as it was, had finally come to light. I watched David and Sophie, saw the pain in their eyes, the love that still lingered beneath the hurt. I wondered if they could ever find their way back to each other, if our family could ever be whole again. I didn't know, but I knew that we had taken the first step. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows across the room, I felt a strange sense of peace. Lily's voice had been heard. Her story had been told. And though the road ahead would be hard, I knew we would face it together. But the fallout from this confrontation would change everything, for better or worse. And as I looked at my son, my daughter-in-law, and the empty space where my granddaughter should have been, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. Nothing would ever be the same. The days after the truth came out were a blur of difficult conversations, legal consultations, and the slow, painful process of facing what we had all lost. The house felt quieter, as if it too were holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. There were moments when I wondered if we would ever find our way back to each other, or if the wounds we'd uncovered would simply keep bleeding, never fully healing. David withdrew at first, his grief raw and exposed. He spent long hours walking the neighborhood, sometimes returning with red-rimmed eyes and a silence that spoke of battles fought deep within. I gave him space, but I also made sure he knew I was there, leaving his favorite tea on the counter, a gentle hand on his shoulder, a quiet reminder that he wasn't alone. Slowly, Almost imperceptibly, he began to return to me. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, he joined me, sitting in the old rocking chair beside mine. We didn't speak at first, but after a while he reached for my hand. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "for not giving up on Lily, or on me." Sophie's fate was less certain. After the confrontation, she moved out of the house, staying with her sister while the authorities reviewed Lily's diary and the evidence Margaret and I had gathered. There were interviews, questions, and a long, painful investigation. Sophie was never charged with a crime. There was no proof of physical harm, only the undeniable pattern of emotional neglect and manipulation. But the truth was out, and with it came consequences. She lost custody of Lily's memory, her place in our family, and in many ways, the life she had built with David. I heard she started therapy, that she was trying to rebuild herself, but I didn't see her again. I hoped, for her sake and for Lily's, that she would find a way to change. For me, the hardest part was learning to let go of the guilt. I replayed every moment, every missed sign, every time I doubted my instincts. But as the weeks passed, I began to understand that loving someone doesn't always mean you can save them from pain. Sometimes it means standing up for them when they can't stand up for themselves. Sometimes it means speaking the truth, even when your voice shakes. I found peace in small rituals. I tended Lily's garden, planting new flowers in her favorite colors. I baked her favorite cookies and brought them to the neighbors who had helped us through the darkest days. I wrote letters to Lily, telling her about the world as it changed, about the ways we were learning to heal. And every Sunday I visited her grave, bringing fresh daisies and sitting quietly, letting the memories wash over me. One afternoon, as I sat by Lily's headstone, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. The pain was still there, but it was softer, edged with gratitude for the time we'd shared. I spoke to her, as I always did, telling her about David's slow return to life, about the hope I felt for the future. I promised her that I would never stop fighting for the truth, that her voice would never be silenced again. Looking back, I realized that standing up for Lily had changed me. I was no longer the woman who doubted her instincts, who let fear or politeness keep her silent. I had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to look away, even when the truth is painful. I had learned that healing is possible, even after the deepest wounds. But what would you have done in my place? Would you have risked everything to uncover the truth, even if it meant losing the family you loved? Or would you have stayed silent, hoping that time would heal what words could not? These are questions I still ask myself, even now, as the seasons change and the world moves on. As I stood to leave Lily's grave, I felt the sun warm on my face, a gentle reminder that life, for all its sorrow, still holds moments of grace. I walked home with a lighter heart, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that I had done what I could, and that, sometimes, that is enough. As I share this story with you, I can't help but wonder how many families carry secrets just beneath the surface, secrets that, if uncovered, could change everything. Maybe you've been in a situation like mine, standing at a crossroads between silence and truth, between protecting someone you love and doing what's right. Maybe you've felt the weight of a secret pressing on your heart, unsure if revealing it would bring healing or only more pain. Have you ever uncovered a family secret that changed everything? What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have risked the peace of your family to bring the truth to light? Or would you have kept silent, hoping that time would smooth over the cracks? I know there's no easy answer. Every family is different, every story unique, but I believe that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to speak up, even when our voice trembles, even when we're afraid of what might happen next. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment when you had to choose between comfort and honesty? Did you ever discover something about a loved one that made you see your family in a new light? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your stories matter, and you never know who might find comfort or courage in your words. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Our community is built on empathy, understanding, and the belief that we can learn from each other's journeys. Every week, we bring you true stories of family, justice, redemption, and the lessons that shape our lives. And if you think this story was powerful, just wait until you hear what's coming next. In our next episode, we'll reveal another family secret, one that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and forgiveness. You won't want to miss it. So, what would you have done in my place? I hope you'll join the conversation, because together we can find strength in our stories and hope in the truth. Thank you for listening, for caring, and for being part of this journey with me.